Can people, my name is Sarah Martin. I am with WAMM, Women Against Military Madness, and some people in this room know that, and some don't. Some are meeting for the very first time, which is Cedar's entourage is in the back, so. Cedar, we're really looking forward to this because it's quite a trip that you went on, a very important international conference, so. But just by way of a little bit of an introduction, which you can all talk amongst yourselves, because you all know this, but the rest, maybe you all do know, you all know that Cedar's a new member of WAMM, right? She was going to protest and said that we were accessible. That's nice. So good to know that. So Cedar joined up and immediately became involved and joined the social media committee and has been going to demonstrations, gave just an incredible speech today at the corner. It's here. Cedar's speech is she just came back to the city from Chicago. She grew up in Malacca. Who here's been to Malacca? I don't think I ever have. Okay. And moved to Chicago for several years where she worked with in a theater production and as a manager for an arts education theater company. So no wonder that speech was so good, right? So well delivered. She actually knew one of the organizers in our contact with International Women's Alliance, Katie Comfort, and went to school with her. And that must have been in Portland or
in Chicago.
Chicago. Oh, she came to Chicago. Okay. All right. And jumped at the chance. I mean, she's got a lot of guts, right? And a lot of passion and a lot of commitment to liberating this world of ours from imperialism. I'll say it. Anyway, so she jumped at the chance to go to this incredible conference in Malaysia, which is every 2 years. Do they do it? ILPS?
ILPS is 4 or 5 years.
Okay, every 4 or 5 years, in the International Women's Alliance and ILPS, and one other organization, I don't remember which one. So she was there for over a week, and you don't want to hear from me anymore, so I'm going to give this to Cedar to sit back and thank you so much. Thanks so much for going. I mean, she jumped at this opportunity, did her own fundraising, and within a couple of months, she was on her way to Malaysia. So we are really lucky.
I was so lucky to go, and I thought it sounded amazing just based off, I saw Katie, my friend from college, posting on social media about it. That's the power of the internet, and I thought that sounds normal. And then she said, you know, I found out that WAMM was a member of IWA, of the International Women's Alliance, and it just made sense to have a delegate there. So I went to 3 different assemblies, the first being International Women's Alliance, which WAMM is a part of, and then International Festival for the People's Rights and Struggles, which is more arts and sort of culture based, a lot of artistic performances throughout, and then the International League of the People's Struggle, which was founded in 2001 and is an international organization that seeks to coordinate the anti-imperialist and democratic movements around the world. It was founded by Jose Maria Sison, founding chairman of the Communist Party of the Philippines. So International Women's Alliance actually started out of the International League for the People's Struggles as part of the Commission on Women. In 2008, they resolved to hold an international conference of women in 2010, resulting in the formation of IWA. And like I said, WAMM is a member of IWA. WAMM is not yet a member of ILPS, but it was really exciting to see all of these assemblies and all of this international solidarity against imperialism. That's the main theme. I'll say those words like 70,000 times. Um, These are the countries represented throughout these festivals, or throughout these assemblies. So I won't read them all, but you can see it's a huge list of countries from all different corners of the world, which is very exciting. And then I'll just go through all the events that I attended. I'll kind of blaze through some of them and maybe give more attention to others, just based on what I want to. But if you have questions or want to hear me expand more about certain things that I did not talk about, feel free to ask questions. I think we'll save questions for the end, but write them down so you remember. So first, we had the International Women's Alliance. On day one, we started with a welcome from our Malaysian hosts. Sato is a Malaysian woman who talked about the effects of neoliberalism and imperialism on the rural farm workers in Malaysia. A lot of farm workers, or most of the farm workers in Malaysia, do not own the land that they till. So she referenced the fact that a lot of them are actually being evicted off of their land and forced to work in the urban centers and factories, which have poor working conditions, bad sanitation, things like that. Part of the effects of imperialism and of US domination. There's after Sato, we heard from Azra Saeed. She is IWA chairperson, and she's from Roots for Equity in Pakistan. She talked about the history of the women's movement and the women's rights for struggles throughout history, starting, with the long-lasting truth of workers facing hunger, poverty, and exploitation at the hands of the elite. We know that these crises of capitalism and imperialism are sort of peaking at this moment, but we have been here before and we've seen this happen before. And that just means that we have struggles to look back to and people to gain experience and knowledge from, so that we can best step forward. She referenced the three global fronts of US imperialism, which she described as NATO, as well as the military front against Iran through Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also in the Asia Pacific where we face China. Other coalitions like Quad with India, Australia, and Japan are also parts of this current imperialism, but those three are most prevalent currently. Next, we have Julie de Lima. She gave the opening keynote. She's the chairperson of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines negotiating panel. And she spoke about the history of imperialism as it relates to women. US imperialism has perverted women's liberation to justify war by minimizing the gender struggle as simply a war between the sexes, instead of what it actually does in truth is harm women. The US imperialism pretends to champion women's rights and turns women into chattel for global markets, holds them prisoner in brute force in economies that create an endless supply of women to exploit. Even though women produce 60% of the world's food supply, they comprise 75% of the 1.5 billion that survive on less than $1 per day. Julie referenced or said that IWA must address the multiplicity of oppression women suffer, must increase determination milestones of women for liberation, examine the current conditions of women, and confront the rising level of class exploitation of women and imperialist wars against women, and set forth the advancement of a militant women's movement. Focus on the plight of the most exploited women, which are peasants and workers, forced migrants, those who face genocide, those who face ecological disasters engendered by imperialism, indigenous women displaced, those who are subjected to religious oppression or sexual prejudice. and we need to emulate to support women's struggles in all countries, and especially Palestine, the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. So that was just the first introduction to the first day. But then we went on to talk about IWA's campaigns, which I'll talk about as well. But I'll come back to that. IWA has a few campaigns that I think are really in line with WAMM and what we're working towards here as well. So then we had a panel discussion. We had 6 people from around the world, and the theme was women resisting escalating military and economic crises around the world. So first we heard from Adora Faye de Vera, who is a survivor of martial law under Marcos Sr. in the Philippines and arrested by his son Marcos Jr. in 2022. She was arrested under trumped-up charges of murder. She talked about the bombing of the Philippines in 2017, when she referenced a specific bombing that was posted online, a photo posted of this bombing as sort of a boasting by the army to say they had bombed an encampment of the New People's Army. And then it was found out there was a lot of backlash against this, and it was found out that actually it was a coconut farm and peasant communities that had been bombed. And when that came to light and they were forced to face it, they removed the photo, right? So it's a government that is backed by the United States and is continuing to purport that militarism is what promotes democracy or advances human rights, and we know that that's not true. She also talked about the 750 terrorists, quote unquote, that the government tried to flush out when in result, 200,000 citizens were displaced during this months-long offensive. So that's Adora Faye. She also talked to me about an experience she had in prison when she was arrested. She had been shot in the leg as part of her resistance, and when she was in prison, she was denied any health care or surgery to fix her or heal her leg. So she just spoke to her leg every day, and she told her leg, "Please heal," and she got through it. She's a remarkable fighter for freedom. The next person we had was My Mercy Lang. She's an activist who's deeply committed to fighting for social change in Myanmar and is currently studying at university in Thailand. She talked about the gender norms in Myanmar and the women's militant fight for liberation after the 2021 coup. Women had been rising up in injustice against their oppressors, but violence against women was prevalent by the military. The shift in gender dynamics was evident after the coup, and women resisted nonviolently. And women have been leading this fight, but after 7 to 8 months, they were forced to take up arms. So she talked about another example of armed resistance against occupiers. She also said that 583 women have died in Myanmar since 2021. The next person is Yejide Ormila from African National Women's Organization, founded by the African People's Socialist Party. She spoke about the Black people in the United States specifically suffering at the hands of the United States imperialism and police brutality, which are one and the same. She spoke on the importance of liberating Africans in the US and the diaspora from colonialism and imperialism. Capitalism would not exist without the history of chattel slavery and the labor of African people throughout history. In the US, this struggle looks like violence by the police and the military, economic instability, and greater health risks, such as the fact that African women experience the highest rates of maternal death, are more likely to die of gender-specific cancers, most likely to develop fibroids, as well as internal impacts of colonialism and their mental health. So in all aspects of health, Black people in the United States suffer greater. Fighting this looks like preparing for a socialist future and governing ourselves and replacing the institution of the colonizer. what we took away from this impactful. I think there was a large representation from all over the globe, but this was one of the times that we got to hear specifically about the struggle against imperialism and state suppression against Black people in the United States specifically. The next we have is Maha. She's a volunteer with the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature, focusing on food sovereignty and occupation. She's from Palestine. She spoke about the ecocide in Palestine as a result of the Israeli occupation. They occupy wells. They prevent rainwater collection. They use pesticides as a weapon against Palestinians. They uproot olive trees and replace the olive trees, which are native and very important to Palestinian life. They replace them with non-native plants to prevent the regrowth of the olive trees. She's part of the Million Tree Campaign, which is aiming to address the systemic damage of farmland, rehabilitating land, installing fences, cultivating trees. They aim to rehabilitate greenhouses. Some farmers use pesticides but have switched to sustainable uses, including kitchen scraps. So they are very resilient and are adapting to the current environment. And the role of women in this is crucial. Many women are on the front lines of this project. Next, we had Vicenta Geronimo Jimenez from the Guatemalan Indigenous Human Rights Defender and a member of the Executive Committee of CODECA. CODECA acronym translates to Peasant Development Committee in English. Due to land grabbing, exploitation, and food insecurity, Guatemala lived through a civil war from 1960 to 1993, when a false peace treaty was signed. This war killed more than 200 people, and more than 50,000 were disappeared, and more than 1 million were exiled, including Vicenta. There was a false peace treaty signed, but now there's even more death than during the war. The violence has continued in Guatemala. CODECA resists the imperialist war system that has plundered indigenous land. They fight for land and water, as well as territorial rights for indigenous people. 18 land defenders have been assassinated, and CODECA was recently named a terrorist organization. That's just a result of the US and Western powers attempting to silence or literally kill anyone that opposes capitalism and imperialism, a theme that keeps repeating throughout this presentation. And then we had Dilar Dirik from the Kurdish women's struggle. She spoke about the Kurdish people who see the current global struggle as the Third World War. Weapons are being tested against Palestinians, increasingly with AI, and weapons developed by Turkey are being tested on Kurdish people with the backing of the US. She spoke about the need for autonomous women's movements and the way of the West attempts to use women in imperialist endeavors as a form of women empowerment. We need to build active networks of resistance to share resources and exchange ideas. She said, we don't want equality in an unjust system, we want freedom. Anti-war protests must develop into broad anti-imperialist formations, was the takeaway of the Kurdish women's struggle. I think I might have a couple more little tidbits about the Kurdish struggle, but they gave a really impactful presentation as well later on in the festival that came after this. More from the first day. This is still the first day. Global regional caucuses happened, so I met with the Americas, and we discussed a resolution that was passed. IWA Americans proposed a resolution to expose and oppose NATO, RIMPAC, CANSEC, and APEC. It was approved and added CENTCOMs, AFRICOM, and INDOPACOM. So a nice recognition and public statement of opposition to those military alliances. We also had a solidarity night with a lot of cultural performances. It was very lively and jovial. There was almost every few hours throughout all of these festivals, there was a song or a dance or a poem. So a lot of really enjoyable cultural presentations from different members of IWA or different members of ILPS who just brought something to share. So if anyone's interested, I can share some of those videos and pictures with you also later. Day 2, we had amendments to the Constitution of IWA. These were mostly kind of language-based, adding or removing certain parts of the constitutional amendments. Executive Council elections, adoption of the 2021 Declaration of Unity Statement, Women of Valor Awards, and then we had closing remarks and a closing cultural night as well. Okay. Wow. Oh, that picture didn't load. I think that's the only difference. That is from a dance at the Solidarity night. Okay. So back to the campaigns that I kind of referenced earlier. International Women's Alliance has 2 main campaigns that I think really closely align with WAMM. The first being War and Militarism, it's literally in the name. Women of the world unite against US-led war, militarism, racism, and imperialist intervention. Violence against women is a systemic issue across the globe. It takes many forms, including militarization, occupation, and domestic violence. They're woven into the fabric of our cultures that see women as collateral damage or an untapped resource rather than integral parts of society and its functioning. The US uses military presence and occupation to dangerously extract resources, and militarism is used as an excuse for supporting other oppressive states in the name of peace or fighting terrorism. The US military budget increases while working women suffer to survive without social services. This makes it women's work to oppose militarism from within the imperial core. In rural areas around the world, Indigenous and peasant women are facing displacement as the same forces require them to work in unsafe conditions, including open pit mining and plantation-style agricultural development. In 2020, the United Nations verified 2,500 cases of conflict-related sexual violence committed mostly against women and girls in 18 countries. So the goals and objectives of the War and Militarism campaign is to educate women on the ways that the US military perpetuates violence against women, to expose and oppose the true impacts of militarization on women, to mobilize women to oppose US-led war, militarism, and violence against women, and to recruit organizations opposed to war to IWA. I would love for there to be more Midwest representation in IWA in general. WAMM is, I think, one of the only organizations from the Midwest that is a part of the International Women's Alliance. And there's a lot of work that we do regarding, environmentalism, pipelines, things that weren't quite as connected to issues that were spoken about, but issues specific to this region and this area of the world. And similarly, north of us in Canada, a lot of those issues I think could be brought more to the global stage if there were more organizations from this region part of IWA. So if you have any ideas for organizations you think would align with IWA, let me know. Then the second campaign is Women Over Profit. No to monopoly capitalism, patriarchy, feudalism, and class oppression. Women over profit. Fight for women's liberation. The global economic system has worsened under neoliberalism. It favors foreign corporations and governments over peasant and working class women and their communities. The wealth gap has worsened, and women feel this immensely due to gender-based systemic and social causes such as barriers to regular work, fair wages, safety, stable living conditions, and equal opportunities. 70% of the world's farmlands are now controlled by 1% of landowners. So the goals and objectives of Women Over Profit are to educate, expose, and oppose national policies which lead to increased food costs, land grabbing, and displacement of peasant women, to conduct political education among IWA members about neoliberalism and exploitation, to take lessons from our members' campaigns to deepen the ways which neoliberal policy impacts women in the day-to-day, and to emphasize the importance of mobilizing working and peasant women to grow IWA's membership to include organizations which represent the most oppressed women. So I think both of them, it's pretty self-explanatory why both of those campaigns are something that WAMM would fall right in line with. The next day, we had the International Festival for the People's Rights and Struggles. The opening program with the theme Unite, Resist, Triumph featured speakers Sarah Jenny Ringam, the Malaysian host, as well as Layla Khaled, a Palestinian freedom fighter, Julie de Lima, and more. This is when we also had a workshop to learn the International Women's Alliance Dance of Resistance, which was part of a cultural night that we performed as the US, mostly, and Canada, I think, was part of it, dance for the cultural night that night. But back to the opening program, Layla Khaled spoke about the long history of displacement and occupation in Palestine. She spoke of the destruction caused by the Israeli military against Gaza. Hospitals and schools are destroyed. This is not a government, this is a gang, she said. She mentioned the faith Palestinians have when they see people across the world voicing their support for the struggles of Palestine. She said, our people are happy where there is no happiness because the world expressed their solidarity with them. Julie de Lima spoke about the history of the Philippines as a Dutch and American colony enduring occupation by Japan and the so-called freedom and independence granted by the US. This resulted in martial law under Marcos Sr. However, out of these struggles, the Communist Party of the Philippines was born. Julie de Lima, for those that don't know, is also the wife of Jose Maria Sison, the original chairperson of the International League of the People's Struggle, as well as the founder of the Communist Party of the Philippines. Then the second day, we had the Power from the Ground presentation by Oil Watch Southeast Asia, which was a really interesting conversation about the presence of oil and the need for militaries to occupy the lands that provide oil around, especially Southeast Asia, and to dominate and to increase their presence in those places. The Asia Pacific is one of the places on Earth with the largest increase recently of U.S. military presence and occupation. Then we had the Alternatives to Capitalism, Kurdistan and Abdullah Öcalan's solution proposals. So this was what I was referencing before about talking more about Kurdistan. So in this conversation, which the bottom picture is from, they discussed the feminist movement in Kurdistan and Abdullah Öcalan, who is a political prisoner and founder of the Kurdistan Workers' Party. He said, the greatest social revolution is the revolution of women. They spoke about the 1968 women's revolution against fascism and the need for women to take up arms against their oppressors. Another example in history of women and oppressed people being forced to take up arms during occupation and oppression. There's a thought that women's autonomy is a threat to the system, and the feminist struggle in Kurdistan has not been without violence. There's a pattern of triple femicides against Kurdish women, where 3 women will be assassinated at once. 3 women were assassinated in 2013, and then again 3 women in 2016, then again in 2020, and again in 2022. All women that were opposing the Turkish regime against the Kurdish people. I definitely recommend, I don't have time to talk about all of these things in depth, but doing more research on that struggle, I think, is really beneficial. And then after that, we had a closing night our closing program and solidarity night. The above picture is a quilt that was sewn at the International Festival for the People's Rights and Struggles, and then again throughout ILPS. It's, what does it say? Women against war and militarism? Women unite against war and militarism, I think is what it said. And they brought this quilt to the Cancel RIMPAC campaign in San Diego that happened right after these festivals or assemblies. The next day was the first day of the International League for the People's Struggles, with the theme Defeat Imperialism, Win Our Socialist Future. We had Layla Khalid speak again. First, we had Julie de Lima speak in a tribute to Joma, Jose Maria Sison. This was the first assembly that he was not present at. He passed away in 2022. So there was a lot of, she was presented with a banner in tribute to him. There were poems up on the walls that he had written. There was a tribute night for him. There's just a lot of remembrance and appreciation for Kajoma and the struggle that he led and facilitated in the Philippines and then throughout the world with ILPS. Layla Khalid spoke again. I was very lucky to get to hear her multiple times, but she was the keynote speaker, and again, she's with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. She spoke about the steadfastness of the Palestinian people and their resistance. She spoke about the global unity for freedom and liberation. She said, our struggles are intertwined. We have to globalize our revolution. She said, struggle has no ideology, it has principle. The imperialists are worried now. She said, let them worry and not sleep. She said, instead of prisons, let's build kindergartens. And she said, don't cry, only fight. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. And then I heard her another time, so maybe there will be more after this, but the ILPS officers spoke as well in report backs, largely about the need to unite as an alliance across the globe and the progress ILPS has made since the last assembly in terms of educational programs, global campaigns, and member building, which have all been imperative for ILPS's success. They said, we need to form the broadest movement to oppose imperialism and move a global people's platform forward. The ILPS Alliance workshop was right after this, and I'll come back to that as well. There's specific campaigns that were discussed, ILPS campaigns that were discussed in terms of wanting to build further alliances and wanting organizations to join ILPS. So we can talk about those in a second. Then we had that evening a discussion about, or a panel on the Palestinian armed resistance and their right to return. This was another event that was really emphasizing the Palestinian steadfastness against all forces. There's, of course, as we know and we've been talking about, there's numerous war crimes, numerous examples of violations of human rights that make this not simply a war, but a genocide and an occupation that people have the right to fight against by any means necessary. Layla talked about the history of the people of Algeria and their struggle with armed resistance. There was a pattern of these struggles in history, trying as hard as they could to fight nonviolently and to resist nonviolently and being forced to find another way. And there are many ways. There are, they talked about all the different types of struggle that different people have have tried throughout history, one of which being the Palestinians, as you might notice, are really, really good English speakers. They can speak to us because they know that if they're not speaking in our language, we're not going to listen as easily. We're going to tune them out. And so there's a huge population in Palestine that is highly educated and knows English and is learning about the history of their country and of their occupation. And they need to know this in order to get the global population to listen. And that's just one of the forms of resistance is education. But we also talked a lot about taking up arms. After that, I went to ILPS Latin America presentation, which was a panel of different people from all over Latin America who are fighting imperialist agendas there. They spoke about the disappearances and the deaths of many indigenous people in Latin America. There's mention of health struggles due to mining, chemical spread through air, water, and people, as well as chemical burns. There's a search for more places to mine because they don't have oil, and gold and silver have been extracted. So now there's a search for rare earth metals in Latin America, which is displacing and disappearing populations of indigenous people who resist this. These industries kill the population, all in the name of Western imperialism and greed. And they also spoke to the issue of labor rights for migrant workers who are leaving Latin America. We know a lot about this in terms of people that are moving to the United States, but they're moving also to Canada, also to Europe, where it's cheap labor force for those countries, and they see it as a benefit. But this is modern day slavery. Sometimes migrant workers are working 120 hours per week. There's documentation of women being kidnapped and more. The United States has also reached into Argentina along with Israel as part of its aggression against Russia and China. So another example of occupying another country in the name of peace or stability somewhere else when no one asked us to come there. Mexico is enduring a crisis of wealth exploitation of the land and water and rural people. People are criminalized for working on their own lands. There are extrajudicial executions. There's also militarization of the police who are trained by the elites of the Army of the United States. There are land defenders that have been sent to jail, including by the US Army. We heard from an Ecuadorian immigrant in Italy who says 3 million have left Ecuador for better circumstances, and some have been incarcerated in the United States. Labor forces need people, and imperialists sign free trade agreements, and it ends up being forced migration. They said that we have to destroy capitalism to avoid this. Uh-oh. Please hold on. Okay. So then second day, we had the plenary on 4 general concerns. So those concerns are the cause, these are ILPS concerns. So we're not part of ILPS, but I think it's helpful to understand or to know what they're focusing on. The concern of the cause of national liberation, democracy, and social liberation, on social economic development and social justice, on democracy in the fight against fascism, including Zionist Israel's fascism, as well as Erdogan's fascist dictatorship in Turkey, and then on the cause of just peace and war, specifically on the US instigation of war in the Korean Peninsula was something that we heard about. The general agreement across these concerns is to unite the people against the attempts by the fascists to divide working people from achieving democracy. National liberation, specifically, Connie Ledesma spoke about the Filipino people's struggle for socialism as an example of this. democracy in the fight against fascism. We had Hassan al-Jaja from the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature and Hakan Sifsi from the Kurdistan National Congress. Speaking on those. We also, let's see, skipping down to the workshop, just rushing through. The workshop on Commission 11 on teachers. So the Commission 11, there are 20 commissions within ILPS, which are essentially specific areas that they are attempting to hold campaigns or to mobilize people in the Alliance and outside of the Alliance to pay attention to from their organization's standpoint and in their part of the world. So those commissions include health, commission on LGBTQ, a commission on workers, commission on children, commission on religion, etc. There's 20, so it's all online also, I can point you to it. But I attended the one on teachers. I am a teacher, so I thought it would be interesting. And they were working on outreach to members of ILPS and outside who are interested in organizing for anti-imperialist education, organizing around unions, organizing around Palestinian liberation, educating on US imperialism, etc. We worked on mapping the anti-imperialist ideological movements, such as LUMAD schools in Indonesia, which are learning institutions established by indigenous communities and targeting possible groups interested in joining the committee or the commission. Yeah, I took notes on all of the other commissions discussions. So if you're interested in what the other commissions discussed, there's a topic for everyone, environmentalism, whatever you want. And then after that, I attended the presentation on Jose Maria Sosa's Techniques and Legacy by ILPS Europe. So again, that was just recognizing his commitments and contributions to the fight against fascism and the fight for socialism around the world. Yeah. Okay, then day 3. I also attended a commission on homelessness concerns. So that's another one of the commissions that they have. And we talked a lot about the different problems caused by imperialism, which exist in a lot of the same ways all around the world and contribute to homelessness in the United States. And we talked about Canada, Vancouver, we talked about Malaysia, we talked about all across the world. There is the issue of homelessness. And ILPS is interested in class solidarity and a fight for socialism rather than a capitalist system that profits property over people. The workshops analyzed the problems created by imperialism and reaction related to the specific concerns, and participants also shared experiences on the struggles and campaigns waged in different countries to address these problems. The workshops also formulated resolutions on the work ahead and the struggles to address the issues of importance. So that's kind of the workshop reports there on the 4 general concerns, as well as strengthening of the ILPS, focused on the different strategies for recruiting more organizations to ILPS. So that was kind of all about, there were a few different presentations on ways that ILPS can be strengthened. They divided up into different groups and people can choose. So there's multiple things happening all at the same time. And then afterwards, we had the workshop reports on commissions. So that's, again, the like Commission 11 and Commission 18 that I attended. All of the commissions gave a report back to the entire group on what they discussed. So again, if you're interested in more of those in-depth kind of conversations that were particular to those specific commissions, let me know. That night, I attended a presentation entitled Clash of the Titans, which was US and China's imperialist agendas in South Asia by ILPS South Asia. And this ended up focusing a lot on the impacts of US-China rivalry on the countries of South Asia and the role India is playing. Actually ended up being a large discussion on India and the countries that surround India, more so than we really talked about China. But it's India through US-backed initiatives, of course. A lot of resource extraction, a lot of infrastructure building specifically to promote imperialism throughout Southeast Asia. Then we had the imperialist designs in Africa and the African people's anti-imperialist struggles by ILPS Africa, which was another really interesting panel on which included speakers of the Horn of Africa region, West Africa region, and the struggles of Africa's indigenous peoples, primarily the Ogoni. They talked about the need for understanding the role that European and US imperialism is playing in Africa and the theft of Africa's freedom and resources in order to keep the West happy. So Africa subsidizes the economy and peace of France and Britain. And while there are 25,000 NGOs in Africa and plenty of missionaries, the true liberation for people on the African continent will come from indigenous sovereignty and national independence. So those examples of all the NGOs and all of the missionaries that travel to Africa, we've seen that it doesn't promote freedom or independence for those countries, and it oftentimes harms those communities and stifles their true vision for liberation. Then day 4, we had the workshop reports on commissions, or more of them. So there was 20 commissions, so they divided it into 2 days. Then there's also a declaration on Palestine, which was a statement written by ILPS and approved, standing in solidarity with Palestine and stating demands of the imperialist nations in power. And then we had a final night of solidarity with another set of cultural performances. So a lot of dancing and singing and poetry. It lasted a really long time. Okay, so then this is a lot. I'm just gonna go really fast. The ILPS US campaigns and they're looking for more organizations to join these campaigns. The No to APEC Coalition, the Defend People's Struggles campaign, the Resist NATO campaign, and Cancel RIMPAC. So the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework exist to increase the profit making of corporations and keep powerful nations powerful. They oppose this, of course. Defend People's Struggles is essentially relating to the US imperialism that continues to be the greatest threat to our people. And in the US, there's an increase in laws against domestic terrorism, which target activists and anyone fighting capitalist or imperialist structures. US deregulation is leading to lower wages, attacks on unionization, and rising inflation. Women and people of marginalized genders are being stripped of bodily autonomy, and we fight this by resisting imperialism and neoliberalism here at home. Resist NATO instigates and Resist NATO, which I know WAMM is largely involved in resisting NATO already, but I will say, just as a primer, NATO instigates and supports imperialist agendas to suppress people's revolutions across the globe, resulting in violence, land grabbing, and environmental damage. Sanctions, military exercises, cyber warfare, mass surveillance efforts, and lobbying for increased military spending is all part of NATO. Cancel RIMPAC, the Rim of the Pacific exercises are the largest joint war operation in the world and are conducted biannually in Hawaii. RIMPAC is used to strengthen US imperialism and its wars of aggression, harming local communities in the Pacific. It trades tactics used by the Israeli army against Palestinians, the Indonesian army against West Papua, and many more examples throughout history. Defense contractors and fossil fuel companies profit through weapons, testing, and war making, destroying indigenous land, and violating indigenous land sovereignty. That's sort of the very bare bones of why ILPS is taking up all of those campaigns. Okay, and that's the end. The cohesive message is that we succeed by uniting as a global people against capitalism and imperialism and forward for a liberated future. There's a strong need to create alliances and work across regions and across struggles. For the next IWA, I think it would be really great if we sent more delegates, if we were able to fundraise or find a way to have multiple people go. I think having one perspective is great, but I think I don't take in everything and I can't be at all of the things at once. So then we inevitably we only have one perspective, essentially. For WAMM, I think I'm floating the possibility of joining ILPS. I think it also aligns with our struggles and our efforts. And then any commissions or campaigns that we'd be interested in joining outside of joining those specific alliances, but finding the specific issues or goals that we'd be interested in working with IWA or ILPS on. And long live international solidarity. Yes.
Thanks so much, Cedar. Now you really got a broad view of what's going on around the world, right? And
Yeah.
the US impact on that. Well, now's the time for questions. Thanks for going.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone who donated also. I know there are
Oh, yeah.
people in this room that helped me go, so thank you so much.
Questions?
How often are the IWA conventions?
Every 4 to 5 years, so yeah, I think it's a big event to throw, which I noticed as it was happening and after, and I think they spend a lot of time working on these campaigns and commissions in the meantime, but the assemblies, yeah, every 4 or 5 years. The last one was 2019 in Hong Kong.
And Denise is putting it in her calendar, I can see. Any other questions? Where to start?
Did
Sarah?
you get to meet Leila Colette?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
I did.
lucky.
Yeah, just briefly at breakfast, it was like one of those things where we all ate breakfast and lunch in the same cafeteria, and she's just a regular person who also ate with us in the cafeteria, so I was walking out with people while she was walking out, and we all got to shake hands and say hi. And yeah, I got to hear her speak 3 times. Just felt every time there was another opportunity, I was like, pinching myself.
She didn't have any trouble getting in or out.
Does she live? She doesn't live
She's
in
in Jordan.
Dallas. Yeah, I was gonna say, was it that other woman that Momo was that her name, or that spoke the other Palestinian woman? Is she the one who was taken into custody when?
No, so that was Hadil Shatara. She spoke. She didn't speak on behalf of the Arab group for food sovereignty. I'm saying that wrong. But she actually, during the Women of Valor awards during IWA, she was the one to accept an award on behalf of a Palestinian woman that was honored because that woman was not able to make it. She was imprisoned. So Hadil spoke. She took that time of accepting the award to talk for about 15 minutes on the Palestinian struggle as well. And so I got to listen to that and then talk to her later about just the importance of hearing her speak. And yeah, I found out about a week ago or so that she had been stopped by the Israeli army on her way into the West Bank. She lives in the West Bank. And for questioning or whatever, and she hasn't been released yet.
what made the biggest impression, or what was your biggest takeaway?
That's a good question. I think that aside from the need for international solidarity and to unite across regions, I think that was one of the biggest general theme takeaways. But I learned a lot about the Kurdish struggle, and that really stuck out to me. Of course, like the insanity of the triple femicides that are happening in such recent history, and the imprisonment of Abdullah Öcalan, a big, the founder of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, but is also such a foundational, I think, support to the feminist movement in Kurdistan, which I wish I could talk more about, but they talked so much about just the way that women in that Kurdish women in the rural areas would meet up. It was important to them to address the fact that they had differences in their needs and their desires for liberation, but they couldn't move forward or struggle or achieve liberation without uniting. So a large part of their struggle was to make sure that the women in these different rural communities could gather together. So I have imagery of like, they talked about meeting in the mountains and yeah, it's just a very strong resistance movement there.
Kathleen.
I was just thinking that it's just crazy the way, I know that Erdogan in Turkey refers to the Kurdish Workers' Party as terrorists, like Israel refers to Hamas as terrorists. When I talked to Jeff Helper the other day, he was saying that actually Israel helped to bring Hamas into being, although they were on their own anyway. And the way they talk about the Houthis, Hezbollah, etc. I mean, God damn it. I don't, it just gets to be so maddening that you don't know what to do. You start to, well, I won't go there, but anyway. It's just difficult when the United States behaves the way it does. I put a lot of blame on the United States for a lot of stuff that's going on.
Right.
Yeah, that's the common enemy or the common the power that keeps coming up in all these struggles is like, it's like not where's Waldo, it's like where's the US? Like they're somewhere, you just have to find out how they were infiltrating these places, whether it's I agree.
That made me think, it might be hard to answer this, but was your overall feeling like discouraged and overwhelmed or encouraged and hopeful? Maybe that's right.
No, I'd say it's a good question. I say it was encouraged because at every opportunity for us to feel discouraged, there's an example of people achieving liberation. There's large or finding joy in the struggle because they know that it's what they should be doing. Like it's, you don't necessarily, I think a lot of times we find meaning and purpose in the struggle and in knowing that there's work being done. And so being able to see so much work being done and so many different groups represented and people from all over the world, it's like, there's nothing going on. There's people everywhere that are resisting this in such brave ways, like Adora Faye, who I mentioned, who got shot in the leg and spent time in prison. She also, her son was with her in prison for part of that time, and she had a baby, she had a family, but she's still fighting against this occupation because she knows what's right. And I think that knowing that history and knowing that there are people that have been doing this like a lot longer than I have is empowering. And there was such a large generation, like large composition of people, many generations older than me, that were there as the elders, as the experience to lean on.
You said that people generally kind of look upon the United States as a common enemy. How, did you get any sense of how, people view China? Because after all, in Asia, China is incredibly powerful. And any sense at all of how they view Russia? Perhaps you did, maybe there was nothing about Russia, but China, I would assume you had
Yeah.
some sense.
Well, the interesting thing was I went to that Clash of the Titans, which was
Right.
originally supposed to be and was like US versus China, and these two imperialist powers fighting it out. And then it ended up being so much more about the US and its role in India. And so that was kind of a point where I would have, that I didn't really learn too much about China's role in that. But I know there's just what was more referenced with China was, and maybe this is from a Western perspective, but like maybe we didn't hear too much about China from those specific groups, but it was a lot of like the US is preparing for war with China.
Right, that's
So-
what I was wondering.
right.
So.
And that's
do
the
they
next,
see China as more on the defense and, or having to deal with this
Right.
onslaught, and how
Oh,
it'll
yeah.
affect the region.
yeah, it felt more that, there's also, I mentioned this on the corner today, but there was, an example of the US, spreading a disinformation campaign against China's vaccine earlier during the pandemic and leading to, a lot of, specifically against, disinformation towards Filipino people to get them to not trust China. And it worked, like only 2% of the population was vaccinated as a result of this disinformation campaign. And so that's just I think a strong theme was that it's the US that's continuing to add more military bases and presence in Southeast Asia. So we heard and in the Pacific, we heard a lot more about that. Although it's not a black and white issue, I think the weight was much heavier on the US. And then same with Russia. We heard a little bit about anti-NATO, and how much of NATO is there to weaken and oppose Russia. And although, Putin's not a good guy either, there's a lot of US antagonizing that's going on that's an expansion of NATO to intimidate Russia that leads to that the US seems to have only positive feelings about. Like it's so, Joe Biden yesterday at his press conference talked about NATO and just bragged about how many countries he's gotten to join NATO and all this stuff instead of ending NATO after the Cold War or recognizing the actual issues of the situation. So that was more kind of what we talked about in terms of Russia was the NATO situation. So honestly, I would say not too much about either one.
Okay, but would you say the view is more from people there that Russia, I'm not pushing a line here, I'm just asking, was antagonized as opposed to the view here, which is, it's all Russia's fault.
Right.
And all they want to do is take over Europe.
Yeah.
Versus why they really did it, they don't even want to take over Ukraine.
Yeah.
They want the Crimea and now the Donetsk and Luhansk, which they didn't even want in 2022. But now they'll take that, but the rest of the country would just destroy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the opinion that,
Okay, that's interesting.
yeah, it was not US favored at all in terms of Russia and Ukraine.
I just want to say one more thing about that. I've heard Medea Benjamin say over and over in her book of War in Ukraine, that she wrote with Nicholas Davies, that in April of 2022, Zelensky and Putin decided to call off this battle. However, Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson to Zelensky and said, you can't make a deal with Putin. This war must continue. So I put the war in Ukraine on Biden, not,
Right,
it's just, that's another thing that's so goddamn maddening. So many people don't know
Yeah,
that.
sorry.
yeah, she, another part of the press conference last night, Biden says he, as of yesterday, literally is not willing to talk to Putin. And in order to end this war, like, you have to negotiate, you have to have, he said he's unwilling to negotiate.
Not really to negotiate, but we have to.
Right.
We won't.
Tell us more about India and what's that all about?
So the Narendra Modi government is in a lot of ways intertwined with the United States. And the that panel was by a few different, 5 or 6 different people from the different countries around India and China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar, I don't think Nepal was there, Pakistan. And they referenced a lot of the industrialization that's going on in that area, which is to theoretically promote economic growth for the powerful nations and to extract resources, but again, is essentially taking over these smaller countries or roping them into their industrialization plans or their infrastructure plans. There's like bridges being built and roads being built specifically like to optimize trade routes that don't need to exist and are displacing local communities. And a lot of just gross money things going on with different US interference of, we'll give you this money for you to do these things that are beneficial to us. So a lot of kind of the same things that we have been talking about is it's India's kind of trying to position itself as like they kept all these other people from the other country. There was India representation too, but the people from the countries surrounding India would refer to India as the big brother and then kind of look over at the guy from India like, is it okay that we say that? Like not in a good context necessarily either, like a mean big brother, a dominating big brother to these smaller countries.
Did they talk about Narendra Modi's anti-Islam?
Did they? I don't know if they did specifically there.
Oh, okay.
It was a lot about the infrastructure and it wasn't quite, it wasn't as, it wasn't super into the religious aspect or the,
Any more questions?
Did anybody mention BRICS? That wasn't brought up as an alternative to banking and economic system. I just heard that, which is weird, that India has joined. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've been seeing like the Modi government is trying to play
they did.
several angles.
That's a good question. They didn't talk, at least where I was. It might have been part of conversation, panels that I wasn't at, but they didn't, no, not at all, as far as I remember.
About environment at all? Was there any mention of the struggle of the Indian farmers,
Yeah,
committing suicide?
Yeah, they didn't go too far into depth about it, but there's, reference of displacement of rural workers and peasants in India, as well as, the extraction of resources leading to wealth inequality, leading to food insecurity, which has ended up with
Being
these.
displaced from their land
Yeah, exactly.
for resource extraction.
And a lot of the similar stories from other places um, in these countries is the displacement of rural workers from their homelands to bring them into the cities to work into factories, which is cheap labor and has, bad, workplace, sanitation and workplace conditions, but is, essentially they're coerced into leaving their homelands because it's being taken over or bought out or
Right.
forced up,
Isn't that happening globally though?
Yes, exactly, it's everywhere,
That's what-
that was a lot of what we talked about in the homelessness, commission was, it's prevalent in Malaysia, it's prevalent, in so many countries, just capitalism. That's what, and because they can do the work, right, the farm work for corporations. Corporations can do the farm work, so we're gonna do that and increase our profits and increase, profits across the world and in the US and increase global trade and blah, blah, blah too. Because theoretically, that's the better solution instead of allowing the farm workers that have lived there for decades and have worked their own land. It's coercion, forced migration.
What about the pollution in India? I've just heard,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, that's not something they mentioned either in that conversation, but it's a huge issue that's, one of the most populous areas of the world and is suffering, other climate catastrophes as well.
Any more? Well, let's give it up for Cedar. Oh, wait.
It's okay. This is kind of like more announcement-y, so
Okay.
I was waiting for the last questions. So,
Well, let's clap for it.
yeah, let's clap. Thank you, Peter. Oh, I'm not gonna show up in the Zoom, but I'm not gonna move it. Yeah, this was just really exciting
Yes.
to learn all of the lessons, and I'm looking forward to the future to integrate all of these, teachings to more WAMM members and just integrating a lot of the practical campaigns as well to what we're already doing. So just thank you for everything. This presentation and just getting this event together has been in the works for like a couple months. So I'm just very happy about how it came together. I just wanted to read more about Hadil Shatara's situation from Palestine and how she is currently in detention. So I wanted to read the statement from IWA that they released, I think like a few days or something really recent to after she was detained, and like action items that they're pushing forward to free Hadil. So I'm just gonna read parts of the statement that you haven't heard yet. So she has been in detention since July 1st, and she is currently being held incommunicado under interrogation, and her family and lawyer have not been informed of her location. The abduction of Hadil Shatara is part and parcel of the systematic attack on Palestinian education by the Zionist occupation regime. She joined 6 Bizret University women students, Yara Abu Hashish, Layan Kayed, Shad Owaida, Mona Abu Hussein, and Wafa Nimr, and hundreds of Palestinian male students seized by the occupation. So the IWA condemns these continued attacks against Palestinian education, women, and all human rights defenders. We call on all of our members around the world to support the calls to free Hadil and to free Palestine. Okay, I don't know if you changed that. So the action items are to share the post and information about Hadil, We took a photo in the office a couple days ago, Gigi and I with signs to free Hadil and hands off Palestinian education, defend our sisters. So hopefully we can kind of uplift that at the next corner and as time goes on. And they're also asking organizations to have solidarity statements. And Katie from IWA updated me a little bit this week. And she said, we found out today that Hadil will likely be in administrative detention for 3 to 6 months. Her lawyer still hasn't gotten access to her, but we're all watching and the IOF knows this. So we're gonna keep raising the call to free her. And I'm very excited for the future as we continue organizing. So thank you all for coming, and we're gonna upload this recording on all social media and on our YouTube in the next couple of days. So just keep an eye out for that and definitely share it for people who might want to learn more about this connection. And also reach out to Cedar, just like the office, if you want to know more of the supplemental materials she had. So thank you so much for coming.